Welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. I'm your host, Clint Murphy. My goal is for each of us to grow personally, professionally, and financially, one conversation at a time. To do that, we will have conversations with subject matter experts across a variety of modalities. My job as your host will be to dig out those golden nuggets of wisdom that will facilitate our growth. Join me on this pursuit. If you want to start a business, but you don't want all the headaches and frustrations, and you want freedom, flexibility, and mobility, this is the episode for you. I talk with Lee LeFever, author of Big Enough, about building a business that scales to your lifestyle and your choices. This is how I intend to live the second half of my life. I love the book, love the concepts, loved the conversation. I hope you do too. Lee, welcome to the Pursuit of Learning podcast. Where I'd love to start with you is, what is motivating you in life right now? And what are 2 to 3 things that you want to make sure we get across to the audience tonight when we talk about your book, Big Enough?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that I'm, constantly motivated by fulfilling an unmet need, I guess is probably one of the good ways to put that. But the thing that I've learned about myself, and this is something I've learned fairly recently, is that a lot of what I do professionally, in writing books, creating videos, doing courses, the strategy that happens within is choosing to take on a problem, which is usually based on that unmet need, and learning through it, understanding how it works, learning as much as I can about it, and then finding a way to earn income teaching other people that thing. And so there's really been 3 big examples. The first is Common Craft and us making explainer videos, which I'm sure we'll talk about in a little while, and learning how to explain ideas and how to make things clear for anyone. It doesn't have to be in videos. And so The Art of Explanation is a book that I wrote. So that came from that experience. Same is true with the Explainer Academy, which is something that all online courses that teach that. The book Big Enough, which we're here to talk about, is about the business side of Common Craft and what we learned in running a business that was designed to be a 2-person business. And then most recently, we went through a project of building a custom home, and we're really passionate about home design. And that's our sort of next thing is teaching that. So I really love being an educator. I love that process of learning what I can. It's kind of do, teach, learn kind of idea. So the couple of things that I would say that I would like for people to get out of this podcast is that you have more choices than you believe. You have more choices than you understand sometimes, and that we all are prone to falling back on tradition and convention and what other people are doing and what we think other people think we should be doing. And I really want to help people see that is not required. And in a lot of cases, it can be really helpful to try to step away from that and try to focus more on your values and the things that really do give you happiness and satisfaction outside of the context of other people's expectations. And, at a higher level, life is short. Don't mess around. You're wasting time all the time if you're not trying to make a positive change in your life, whether that's health, business, family, whatever that is. There's no free ride. You have to work for it. And the clock is ticking.
I love it. And I know we're going to, for sure, cover off both of those based on some of the observations and thoughts and information that I had in reading your book, which was a great read and really aligned with where I'm going in my life as I, look forward over the next 5 years and create, I guess I'll call it Clint 2.0 Lee. And, Big Enough was really a roadmap of where I want to take it. A 2-person business with me and my wife, and that being our life. But I definitely want to digress, because when I read the book, you were just, and this was going to be my final question, so we don't have to give away all the nuggets, but you at the time you wrote, you were building the house on Orcas Island, and you were just starting the process. And so it sounds like, by the time the book was written, you may be further along or finished that process. What was that like?
Yeah, it was a wild time because the book was coming out. We were within months of moving into the house during the pandemic. So there was a lot of things happening all at once. And at the time, I think that in the milieu of it, I was, it didn't feel that crazy at the time, but looking back, it really was. It was stressful for me to market a book during the pandemic. That was something that I kind of wish that I didn't have to do. I wish I could have just done that another time, but everything went well with that. And we moved in just about a year ago. And it's been amazing. I'm speaking to you from the new office here. And we feel very lucky to be able to have an opportunity to design and build a house according to our lifestyle. We worked with an architect and builder to make it happen. And they were wonderful partners who really took to heart our ideas. And I think we're at a point where we feel like this is our forever house. Leading up to this conversation, I was thinking about how I'm really focused on the garden and the trees and the things we're planting. My wife is more on the vegetable side. I'm more on the landscaping side. And I kind of thought that for the first time in my life, I feel settled enough to plant a tree and actually think that I will see that tree become a 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old tree. And that's a comforting feeling, I think, to feel that way. And there's probably a business lesson in there too.
Yeah, and they grow much faster than you think. I remember I drive by my childhood home when I go visit my parents, and I remember my dad one year planted a Christmas tree. We had a live Christmas tree, and he planted it in the front yard after. And that thing was, fast forward 20 years, 15 years, that looked pretty dangerous. They ended up cutting it down, the people that lived in there after us, but it grew much faster than anticipated. Okay, so that's where you're living now. I love that journey. Let's jump back in time. So going right back to the beginning where you start in the book, and I want to start with a realization that you had about entrepreneurship. Because so many of us, right, when we start a business, we think we want to be rich, we want freedom, and your observation is generally it's the exact opposite of what you end up getting as a founder, right? So wondering if you can start us off with what the reality is more like and why there's such a disparity between what we think and what we picture and what we end up getting.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for asking about that. We lived in Seattle for 20 years and have lots of friends who were founders and are founders of tech startups. And we saw their lifestyles. We saw what they were after. And, the allure of growing a business into a unicorn and selling it for $1 billion is undeniable. Like, it's something that is a magical experience. But I think that in reality, it happens to very few people. It's not something that you can ever expect to happen. I think of it almost like going pro in the NBA or something, that it's not something you can plan on. And it takes a very specific combination of what my friend Tony says is miracles. But the allure is so powerful, a lot of people go into it without thinking about the personal cost of it. And I think the reality is that some people are prepared for that personal cost. They're willing to put whatever it takes to make it happen into it, whether they have to work themselves to death or not. And some people are wired that way. I'm not saying that that's wrong. But what happens, I think, for a lot of entrepreneurs is they feel like they're not doing it right unless that's their goal and that they're doing those things. And that means maybe that they wear their busyness and their lack of time for anything else as sort of a badge of honor. And again, some people want that. I don't fault them for it. But what I worry about is people assuming that that's the only way to do it. Because I think there are lots of ways to think about business and lots of ways to be rich and to be successful and to be powerful that don't involve that specific type of entrepreneurship.
And that was the realization that you had when you decided to start your business, which you talked about in the opening as one of the three things that have happened over time, and that's common craft. So when you started that, right from the beginning, the idea was that it would be a two-person business throughout time. Can you take us back to that decision you made and also give a little bit of a backdrop for the listeners so as we talk through the conversation today, they understand what you were doing at Common Craft?
Yeah, sure. So I came from being an online community manager back in around the year 2000 at a company. I started an online community program there and just fell in love with the idea of the internet being a communication medium, essentially. And I left Common Craft to my wife's, Sachi's, through her encouragement. She's a huge part of what we do at Common Craft. She says, it's time for you to go on your own. I'll stay at the job and make sure we have health insurance and you can start consulting doing online community consulting, which eventually became sort of social media consulting at the time. And what we realized in that experience was that, for one thing, I was convinced social media was going to take over the world and that it was going to be a huge thing. And there was going to be a lot of confusion because it was such a new thing and a different thing that people had encountered. And for me to be a successful consultant at the time, I needed a way to educate my clients about what to expect. Like, why should I care about a wiki? What's a blog? Should I be using social networking? Like those kinds of things. And really enjoyed the process of explaining those things to my clients. A few years later, YouTube becomes a big deal. This is the first couple of years of YouTube, and Saatchi joins Common Craft. So we're a two-person company, and we think, is there some way we can make videos and put them on YouTube, and maybe that will help our consulting practice somehow? And so we started thinking about what we could explain. And I looked back at some of the things that I'd explained to my clients, like RSS, which was a big deal at the time, and wikis and blogs and social networking. And I tried doing the guy in front of the whiteboard kind of videos and felt really uncomfortable. And that was pretty much a failure. And it was Saatchi's idea to point the camera down onto the whiteboard and just use hands and pieces of paper and markers to tell a 2 or 3 minute story. And so our first video was called RSS in Plain English, and it's on YouTube. And it explained RSS, which was really popular at the time because it allowed people to subscribe to blogs so that when new posts arrived, they would be notified about the post instead of having to go look for it. And to our surprise, that video blew up and was a viral hit at the time. I always say it was a 2007 style viral hit. It was more modest than today. But we suddenly became what was known as professional video producers and specifically explainers, because we always said from the beginning, our goal is to explain and to put it in plain English. And it happened overnight almost that the videos took off. People wanted more. We made more. We started getting hired for videos. Our second client was Google. We did the video Google Docs in plain English, which you can find on YouTube. And very quickly, we realized that our current situation was not very sustainable, that we had multiple options. We could start to build a creative agency, hire a production team, start getting into the custom video side of business, which would have probably made a lot of money. But on the other side, we started to get requests from people to license our original videos, like the videos on wikis, so that they could use it in their classroom or their presentation or their intranet. And so that led us to really take a step back and think, okay, we've been very lucky to get these incredible opportunities. We have a lot of demand for what we're doing. If we don't choose wisely at this point, then we could make a choice that goes in a direction that we don't understand. Or what was important to us at the time was that, we're a married couple working from home. If we choose poorly, it could not only impact the business, but it could impact our personal relationship. And at that point, then what's it all for, right? Like, why would we do that? So in 2008, the year after we made that first video, we sat down and said, we're going to introduce some constraints to this business. And we're going to agree to abide by those constraints for however long it takes. And that was when we decided that we would always be a two-person business, and that being a two-person business would be the constraint that helps us evaluate business opportunities. And it really did that. It really opened our eyes to what's possible using the web, using technology to create essentially a scalable style business with two people working at home. And that was always our biggest goal.
And so that's one of the things, so many things in there that we're going to come back to. The first one, because that's one of the ways that you use to simplify decisions in your business, is you talk about using constraints to guide your decision making. So that was only one of the constraints you had. I think there were a number of them. Can you dive a little deeper into how we can use constraints as a tool in our decision-making process and tie it to how you did it?
Yeah, sure. So I think that if you think about art, right? If you are a creative person, you want to make something beautiful, you have to choose what tools you use to do that. And once you choose a tool, then if you choose acrylic paint, you don't have to think about sculptures. You don't have to think about watercolor. You don't have to think about all those things because you have the thing that you're focused on. And I think in business, there's often, there's not the constraint, there's not that kind of constraint. There's the what's going to make me more money. That is the guiding principle, is what's going to make me more money, which is totally valid. That's not a bad thing. But for us, constraints were liberating. And I think that's one of the sort of paradoxical things about constraints is they're liberating. So an example applied to us in the art example is that with Common Craft videos, they also operate under constraints. For example, we don't have any music. We have no intro, outro music. There's never been music. It's just my voice the whole time. And that became a constraint. And it means that we don't ever have to think about that stuff. And anybody who makes a lot of videos and uses music, they know that music decision is always a time-consuming thing to try to figure out what's the right music, what's the right licensing, whatever. If you just say, you know what, that's a constraint, we don't do that, then you can keep moving. And for us, by being a two-person company and having the potential to license our work, it meant we didn't have to think about hiring and firing. We didn't have to have a payroll. I say in the book that once you cross that one employee, cross the Rubicon of having one employee, then the business becomes a fundamentally different thing. And some businesses require that to grow. It's not a golden rule, but it is something that is possible, I think, to think about that constraint. In terms of the business opportunities, it meant that we could look at something and say, what if it works? Like, if this idea for Common Craft works, is it going to require employees if it actually does well? Or is this something we can manage into the future in a scalable way? And that's probably the biggest sort of lesson that we learned through thinking and through constraints, is that idea of thinking, okay, this might be a great idea, but if it works, are we going to have to support it? Is it going to require salespeople? Is it going to require developers? Is it going to require designers? And there's all of these things that come along with that. And we really enjoyed the process, honestly, of looking at these business decisions and trying to figure out how to make them work under that two-person constraint.
And you just dove into something else that I love that you talked about. And so what we're going to dive into, you can use it to look forward in the future. Let's say, I think you said about target 5 years. And you can look forward and say, well, what's the good and what's the bad? And that's that question that you just asked right there. What if it works? So what if it works? As in, what's the profitability? What would that look like? What would the revenue be? How would the business be? And would we have to hire people? Would we have to manage people? What would our day-to-day lives look like? So can you talk through the power of that question and how you use that in conjunction with constraints to every time you made a pivot? Because throughout the book, pivot, 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 pivot. So you talked about failure, and it's only failure when you stop or you don't learn the lesson. But how did you use that question each time to guide the future of Common Craft?
Yeah. Well, I can give you an example of one of the decisions we made early on that was guided by that idea. We were known as the first movers in terms of explainer videos. And that meant we had a lot of demand coming to us, coming to commoncraft.com. And we kind of looked at that and said, there's a lot of demand coming to us. Even if we had a team, it would be more than we can service. It would be a shame to not find supply for that demand. Maybe we're in a position to help these incoming leads find other producers. And so other companies had started to say, hey, we do explainer videos too. And I went out and looked at their work and contacted them and asked them about this idea that we had of creating something called the Explainer Network. And the idea was that they could be a part of a sort of a group on our website that has a listing on commoncraft.com called Explainer Network. And then when demand comes to us that we can't service, we can say, we can't help, but go look at our Explainer Network members. They're also making explainer videos. And we did that and did it with a monthly fee that was not based on revenue. Again, this is a recurring theme. We could have made more money probably if we had done a rev share agreement where we made money in accordance to their income. But again, administration, that if it grows and grows, that requires much more detail-oriented administration, a lot more time. We thought, we're a two-person business. It's a simple idea on the website that I can personally put together. And the monthly fee is static. We don't ever have to think about it. Either you're paying or you're not. You're on the website or you're not, kind of a thing. And to our surprise, it worked for many years. It was our first taste of passive income, or income that was disconnected from our time and effort, where this was happening in the background. And that was the first time we thought, like, okay, this is a business model. This is the kind of business model we want to pursue because it checks all the boxes for us. It allowed us to remain sort of in the center of this burgeoning industry by being the marketplace. It kept our domain higher than the others at the time, and also help the industry grow, help people understand that there is a thing called an explainer video, and that there are specialists in that world. And yeah, I think that was an early win for us. And unfortunately, it didn't go on forever. Again, like you said, lots of pivots. Eventually, the video industry changed such that there were just many times more producers all over the world, and the market changed to an extent that it really wasn't sustainable for us. But it worked for 6 or 8 years, I think, which surprised both of us.
Yeah, there's 3 things that jump out at me from that example, and I'd love you to, you can choose which one you want to tackle. So the first thing is clear for you and Sachi that you have an abundant mindset, because for you to look at it and say, well, hey, there's more than enough to go around. We don't need to have a scarce mindset. We can bring everyone together and there's work for all of us. So that's beautiful and a concept not everyone shares. The second was, you said that was your first flavor of passive income. And so I think we'll talk about passive income throughout the show, so we can dive in there or tackle it as we work our way through some of the other points. But there must have been a feeling for you guys on the first time you go to bed at night and you wake up and you get the checks are coming in. You're getting the notification that money's getting printed, right? The bank's printing the money while you're sleeping. So that's beautiful. And the third one is, and maybe this is where we dive in, is so many of us when we're entrepreneurs and we're a service-based business, and that's where you started, right? Was you started with consulting, is all of our revenue and our income is tied to our labor. It's tied to the hours that we put in. And so the first time that you create the network is the first time, wait a second, this is a product now. And so for entrepreneurs that are out there that are service-based entrepreneurs, how can they reframe their thinking to try to put together a product or something they can sell outside of their labor?
Sure. I have an answer to that. I do want to touch on the first thing that you said about this abundance mindset. And one of the things, I don't think it's in the book, but I say this often, is that the internet is really big, and that traditional business is based on scarcity, supply and demand. It's a zero-sum game, right? If I'm losing a customer, you're gaining a customer. The internet, it does not work like that on the internet for most companies, especially small companies. There is no zero-sum game. It's not about trying to necessarily beat your competition so much as it is trying to find the right audience and showing them what you do and why you're the best at what you do. There's plenty of customers to go around, I think, for internet-based businesses. And the whole zero-sum thinking thing, I think, does not apply as much. I just wanted to kind of put that out there. So, okay, now there were 3 things. And the third one I really wanted to talk about, but I got mixed up on the last one.
Yeah, the second one, which we'll talk about throughout because of all the different pivots and things you produced, was going from, every hour is how you get income to the first flavor of passive, which ties to the third one, which is for those people who don't know how to do that, how do they go from only charging for their time to selling? Because really what we want is we want to sell the value we add to someone's life, right? We don't want to sell, well, no one's going to pay me more than $250 an hour, so I can only charge, there's a ceiling on that, I think, right?
Yeah, definitely. So in our experience, that it can come down to how you think about intellectual property and how you think about the intersection of business models and intellectual property. So an example that I can tell you from our business is that when we were working for clients and making videos, I tell the story in the book, but we had a contract that a business had one of their lawyers review, and the lawyer came back and said, I need some specific language in this contract. It needs to say that this video is a work made for hire. And we were like, oh, that sounds very specific. Sure, we'll put it in there. And I didn't think a lot about it at the time, but now I realize that it's one of the most important phrases in business and especially creative service-based businesses. And what that means is that the video, because we make it, we're the producers, it's like wedding photos. If you make something via US copyright law, you own it by default. You have the right to make copies. You have the right to use it however you want by default. So if we make a video, even though we're hired from a client, by adding that language, this is a work made for hire, it means that we are transferring our copyright to the company that hired us. And so that means we cannot make money in the future. We can't make copies off of that video. They can. And that's part of the deal. Like, that's just the way that business works in a lot of cases. But I think that a lot of people in the services business see that, I can make money in this work for hire services kind of way. But the other side of that is thinking, well, if I'm giving them my copyright, then what can I copyright? What kind of intellectual property can I create that I can show, I can build my value into it, that I can use my unique perspective, my skills, and formally think about it as like, this is my copyright. I have the exclusive right to make copies, and I'm going to sell those copies. And that's what any software, almost any software you buy, certainly from Microsoft or Adobe, you're not buying the product, you're buying the permission to use that product. You're buying a copy of their intellectual property. So I think for some people, that is a path, is to think about, what is something you can make once and sell it 1 million times. And the structure that supports that is US copyright law. I always encourage people, if you create something that you think has value, put a copyright thing on it, but also register it with the federal government. It's just a good fail-safe way to always protect what you make.
And so the first thing you realized was, wait a second, we have to own our own videos. And that also led you down the road to saying, well, wait a second, when we have our videos on YouTube, we don't own that platform. Something can, they change the search algorithm, they prioritize something else. Regardless of what it is, you realized we have to own our platform. So another big pivot and risk for Common Craft. What did that look like, and what did you do about it?
Yeah, we got started on YouTube. We could not have become known the way we were without YouTube. And it was a big part of everything we did in the early days. But once we started to license our work, we realized that there was so much brand awareness based on YouTube that we had to somehow change the perceptions of people who might be our customers from thinking Common Craft is a YouTube channel to Common Craft is a place where I can download videos for professional uses. And so we kind of started to think like, not only do we, first of all, let me back up and say that, to your point a minute ago, that, once you upload a video to YouTube, you're signing an agreement that says that you are giving up a lot of your rights of what you can do with that video, how you can control that video. Like, you can't tell someone, you can't link to this, or you can't embed this. If you have embedding on, like, you can't control how it's used. There's a lot to it. And for a lot of producers, it's really useful. But for us, because we were so focused on licensing our original work, our intellectual property, we started to see YouTube as a risk, that the more we build brand there, the less we're going to build from commoncraft.com, which is something we own, we control. And you mentioned platform risk. That's really the big idea, is that I always say, don't build your empire on someone else's land. Like, if they own the land, they have the power to do whatever they want to it, and you could be stuck that way. And we saw that with YouTube, is that I wasn't scared of YouTube going out of business, but they can change policies. They have the search algorithms. They have the advertisers. They have all these things that we can't control. So it was pretty clear to us that if we were going to make this licensing thing work, that we could not use YouTube anymore. And for a video producer at the time, seemed kind of crazy, honestly.
And so one more thing that I'd love to dive into, because when you talked about licensing, something that you brought up that jumped out at me that I don't think a lot of people do is you started to reach out to the people that were licensing product from you and asking them, what do you love? What can we do more of? In essence, surveying them to tell you what to create more of that you could then sell them more of. What gave you that idea to do that as a path for, I guess in a way that's customer retention, right? And I think you highlight it's cheaper to retain someone than go get a new client. But how can we use that concept in our business to generate more business?
Sure. So there's a couple of things. I will say, just for context, that one of our early decisions with Common Craft, well, it was a later decision, really. We moved from doing a la carte downloads, which, you pay once, download a video and go on your way, to a membership service that's renewing. So it renews on an annual basis. And we can talk a little bit more about that, but I wanted just to position that as a part of this discussion, that once you have someone who is a member, keeping the membership going takes another kind of work. But to your point about, these ideas that come from customers, a lot of times, especially in the beginning, we weren't so much going out to ask as just really taking seriously anything that was coming to us. And so an example was that Common Craft style evolved into sort of our own signature look and feel, with paper cutouts, with bodies that had no hair or have no hair, no facial features, no real fingers and hands, and a specific look and feel. And people like them. They're very flexible. They don't sort of look like anything specific. And people said, I would love to make my own videos. I would love to have a library of those images so that I can put them in my presentations, or I can use them in documents, or whatever it is. And we kind of looked around and said, wow, we've got a lot of these things. What if we started to license those too? What if that became part of Common Craft membership, is you could be a member of Common Craft at a level where you could download all the PNGs of all those things you wanted. And that, again, became another product that we could sell via a recurring membership service that served that need that we learned was out there from listening to our customers.
And so something that comes across clearly while you're talking about this is an absolute passion for everything Common Craft, explainer video, and what you're doing, Lee. How important is it for entrepreneurs or people that are considering, I'm going to leave my job and I'm going to pursue, it doesn't have to be the unicorn, it can be a solopreneurship. How important is passion to you in what they're doing?
Yeah, I think it's essential. I think that people who are moving into being an entrepreneur for the first time and thinking about business ideas, in the early days, everything looks rosy. And things like, man, I'll pick up dog poop every day for so much an hour. That sounds like a great way to make a living. And nothing against the people that do that. That's a valid business. But I think that people underestimate to what degree the business takes over every part of your life. And that's what you realize you're talking about all the time. You're dealing with those people all the time. And that can be good or bad. And it's just one of those realities that I think people sometimes neglect to think about. I tell the story in the book of Apoorva Mehta, who founded Instacart. Before he started Instacart, he got about $1 million in funding in Silicon Valley for doing a social network for lawyers. And it actually started to work and started to get some traction. And the story that he tells is that he looked around and said, I don't give a crap about lawyers. I don't care about what they are thinking about, what they're working on. Like, it's just not something that I care about. This is just an idea. It's not something that I'm actually interested in. And to his credit, he gave back the money, the VC money, and said, I'm not doing this anymore. And then founded Instacart after that. So maybe he is passionate about grocery delivery. I don't know, but yeah.
I love that. I loved that example. So let's go back in time. So we've chatted a lot about the different things that you've done through Common Craft. And throughout the book, you have some great examples of things we should be thinking about if we're starting our own business or solopreneurship. And one of the first things that you talk about is the importance of blending luck and attention. Can you let the readers know, or listeners, sorry, what you mean by the importance of luck? And in today's social media world, attention is huge. So what's the focus there, and how do we go about building attention for our business?
Yeah, sure. I think that we at Common Craft, Sachi and I, got very lucky when we made those first videos. It happened to be good timing when YouTube was just getting started. There was a wave of a sort of social media revolution that was starting. I think that we're lucky that we were born in America, born with great families, in a safe place. Like, that's something that I don't think we can take for granted in terms of luck. But the thing that I looked at a lot in terms of luck is what they call, I think it was Jim Clark in one of his books, calls return on luck. And it means that you're not just passively receiving luck, that part of the thing is recognizing when you've had what he calls a luck event, which means you've fallen into something that you didn't expect and that is actually working for you in some way, and being able to recognize it and say, wow, this is an opportunity, and then be willing to put the work in to turn that luck into something sustainable. because luck comes and goes. It's not, you don't get lucky unless you win the lottery in a way that necessarily keeps you going. It takes work. And that's the return on luck. And I think that that's really kind of what we look back and see our story being, is that we got lucky and got some attention early on by making these videos, but we didn't just stop there. We kept pushing and tried to use that stroke of luck for years ahead and build and build and build on it in a very intentional way. And I do think that the hardest thing in some ways is being able to get your name out there somehow. This is a weird reference that I've probably never talked about before, but before making the videos at Common Craft, I was talking to someone, and this was like when the Paris Hilton sex tape came out or something, I think it was Paris Hilton, whatever, but it was all over the news. And we were talking about that and how all the attention that came from that and how she was suddenly a star because of it. And I was like, and I told somebody, I was like, maybe there's a business lesson here. Sometimes you just have to put something out there and be willing to take the risk of it not working or looking silly, or, in her case, I don't know how she perceived that, but being willing to take a risk and put something out there that may make you feel anxious, right? That make you feel self-conscious about, should we really be doing this? What are my peers going to think? What's people are going to talk about me behind my back, and just be willing to push through it.
Well, you raise a huge thing there, right? Because so much of what we're talking about are different things that you can do as you go along, how to structure it. Everything's kind of conceptual. It's planning. And you even highlight in one of the number one things I see, whether it's hosting men's groups, it's talking to people online on Twitter, or people in real life, is they like to talk about it. They like to plan it, but they don't start, right? They don't actually take that action, which you just said. You have to be willing to step out of your comfort zone, take the risk, and take the action. So Lee, when you're talking to someone who is afraid of that, right? They don't take the plunge. What do you say to them? How do you have a conversation to get them to take the plunge?
Yeah, I've heard that called a bias for action. I think that might even be one of Amazon's big things. Yeah, one of Amazon's big things. Yeah, I can only explain sort of how I look at it. And very clearly, I've learned over the years it's really that first step. It's doing something that no one else has to see. That's not for public consumption, but every single thing you do, you learn from. And you slowly but surely get better at that thing. And once you take that first step, it relieves so much of the anxiety. You can get towards that state of flow where you're seeing it from a whole new perspective, and you work on it because you love it. Before that happens, it's really easy to make up all the reasons why you shouldn't be doing it. But if I have an idea, if it's for the website, I just start wireframing. I'm going to put a box here. I'll put a heading here. How does this look? Or even I'm starting to do some woodworking now, and I'm terrible at it. I can't get my miters to work out. And there's all kinds of things like that. But I could sit back and be discouraged about it. Or I could be tomorrow I'm going to make it better. And it is hard and not everyone is like that. And I realize that. But that first step is really what I say is the big thing.
Well, one of the things that jumped out at me about you is you talk about a line that your brothers taught you. They were older than you when you were younger. And it's a line that I really use a lot in my own life, which I think ties to a bias for action. And that's simply that if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough, right? And so throughout Common Craft's history in your life, you just keep trying. So sure, you suck when you start. You're not that great. But I'm sure when we talk again in 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, Lee, you're going to be a damn good order worker because you're just going to keep doing it till you are one, right?
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah, that was a water skiing example for my brothers where they're like, you're not falling enough. You need to be pushing yourself more. And I do think that applies. I think about this a lot actually with Common Craft, that I feel like 90% of the things I've done since those first videos have been some form of failure. There's a quote from the light bulb.
Is it Edison?
Edison, I think it's Edison. I haven't failed to make the light bulb. I've only found 10,000 things that haven't worked. And that really is kind of the perspective that we have, is failure, I think when people talk about failure in business, you think about the catastrophic liquidation failures, and that definitely happens. But I think that being an entrepreneur is having a sense of hope and a sense of optimism that helps you see that everything you try inevitably is going to have some element of failure. Nothing's ever going to be perfect. And in most cases, it's actually mostly failure and a few lessons learned. Because every time, I mean, in the early days of Common Craft, we were very fortunate because we had a lot of attention. We had a lot of interest in what we were doing, and kind of things, we could throw things out and they would work sometimes just because of purely having the attention. And that eventually went away. But they all had an element to them, or later on, as we tried things, I realized like, okay, we don't have that power anymore. That's not something we can do now. So I learned to accept disappointment, you could say, where like, I'm going to do an email campaign. Oh, that did not work. I need to figure out how to do that better. And some form of that is a part of everything we do now. But to me, I feel like I'm fortunate that I'm an eternal optimist. Like I really thrive on optimism and reframe, like thinking like, yes, this might be a failure, but look at what I've learned, or look at what the direction that we can take now. And that's why we've been able to do this for so long, I think, is that we're always reframing. We're always seeing failure as a source, like a source of inspiration and a source of new ideas.
Yeah, and one of the things I love that you would do early on in your journey with the videos, and I'm sure you continued throughout the history of Common Craft, and what really jumped out at me, because there's just a series of questions you seem to ask yourselves that are very introspective, and this was one of those. And so every time you finish a project, you ask yourself, what sucked the most about this? And so, it's like, hey, we always know it can get better. So what's the one thing that really sucked? So next time we don't make that same thing, Lee. Can you tell us more on that one?
Yeah, definitely. I'm glad you brought that up, Clint. When we started doing the videos, it's important for people to know, I think, that we had no idea what we were doing. Like we did not come from any kind of video background, any kind of educational background, any kind of animation background, nothing at all. So we really were stumbling through, and we sort of came to what we call solve problems as they need to be solved, versus taking a step back and trying to learn everything, just dive in and figure it out. And I think that there's a couple of lessons there. I think had we had an education in video, it might have been a barrier to us in our specific situation, because I think we might have been worried about what our peers in the profession would think about us, or that we would have some baggage about like, are we doing this in a way that we learned in school, kind of a thing. But for us, we were totally free of that, because we didn't know what we didn't know, essentially. So we were very much making something, looking at it and saying, what sucks the most? We have to fix the microphone. Okay, we fixed the microphone. Next time, oh, what sucks about this? Oh, the voiceover's too fast. It was just, and we're still doing that today. But I think, had we said, oh, we want to make these videos, let's not start yet. Let's go learn for a year and then come back. I just don't think that we would have been able to do what we did. And I don't think it would have appealed to people in the way that it did, because they very much saw us being, people making videos in their garage and not a fancy studio. And that was part of the charm, I think.
Yeah. And so when I hear that, I see, or I'm hearing a bunch of the different elements we've already talked about coming together, right? So instead of planning forever, biased action. Let's launch, let's get something out there. And we may fail, but through that failure, we're going to learn, and the next one's going to be better. And so everything you're talking about really coalesces into this, what sucks about it. But what that won't prevent us from doing is not launching, right? We're going to put it out there, and then we'll fix it next time. And then we'll put something out. And so would you say, like, if you look at the productivity might not be the right word, but the output that you generate through Common Craft, would you say that this type of mindset in thinking allowed you to produce much more than you otherwise would have if you always wanted to be perfect?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that imperfection is, I think, a part of everything we've done. Like if you see those early videos, and to some degree, the videos, our latest videos, our thing is not high fidelity. Our thing is not beautiful graphics and perfect lines and perfect gradients and all those sorts of things. Like our thing is communication. And I think that ultimately what we think about in terms of competition and common craft and everything else, and maybe we'll get into how we think about the competition and our place there, is that our look and feel is unique to us, but that's not our competitive advantage. Our competitive advantage is actually writing. It's like how we write a script. And that's really our focus. Like that's where the explanation lives. Like we're explainers. So we are really focused on what's being said, in what order, what examples, what analogies, all those things, and trying to all do it in like 500 words. And that's our product. That's where our talent is, in the writing. Everything else is helpful, productive, good for the brand, but we wouldn't be anywhere without the writing. And so like all that other stuff may not be high fidelity. It may not be perfect. It may not be whatever, but what you're hearing in the voiceover is really written words on a page. And that's where we try to really be perfect.
And so let's dive into that. How do you see yourselves relative to the competition, or do you even see it as competition?
Yeah, people always say that, who do you compete with? And again, this goes back to the idea of the internet being really big. There's never been a company that I know of that has done exactly what we're doing. There's the Khan Academies, which are huge and supported by philanthropic organizations. There's all kinds of YouTube channels, CPG Grey and Kyrgyzstan, and like there's just a lot of amazing producers out there. But for our specific style of the videos we're doing, we're like boutique. Like we're like, you like Common Craft. If you like Common Craft, you're going to be a part of Common Craft, not at the cost of something else, but just because you like Common Craft, because our writing is a fairly unique perspective that you can't get anywhere else. And I'm not saying it's better. It's just that it's unique. And in that way, we don't think about other videos as the competition. We're sort of focused on our specific perspective. And really that means that for us in the last 8 years, what teachers need in classrooms, that's really who our customers are. In the last 8 or 10 years is really people using our videos to teach in classrooms, in schools, universities, community colleges, sometimes in organizations.
And so, Lee, as someone's thinking about setting up their own business, they're starting to set goals for it. How do you suggest they look at it in a way where they're zoning in on what you talk about, time is the new wealth, and look at happiness, and it doesn't have to be about money. So, as I start to map out my retirement and moving from an accountant to a creative, and I start thinking, well, what are my goals for the business? How should I start thinking through that in a more, one might say, wholesome or holistic way?
Yeah, I think of it as a mindset a little bit. I think that in American society, for sure, that we, have been taught what business success looks like, and that businesses are created to grow, and they certainly are in a lot of cases. And I think it's important to note too that I'm really interested lately in neurodiversity and how different all of our brains are, and how, we're all way more unique than we think we are. And we assume that other people are like us. And I think that the big enough idea, I think it's not a universal idea that can apply to everyone. I think people have different needs, different perspectives, different sort of brains. But for people who are willing to explore the idea, then it is sort of challenging the dominant idea of why businesses exist and what they're really for. I talk some about this idea of choice as a shareholder value. So, if you think about a typical business, this is public businesses, let's say, they exist in some ways to increase shareholder value. That's what they do. In fact, some of them are legally obligated to make decisions that benefit their shareholders. That's like the fiduciary. Well, I'm talking to an accountant, right? You know all this. But business exists to do that. But what we realized at Common Craft was that, we're small. We're just a 2-person business. We're not public. But, we're the shareholders. We're the stakeholders. We're the ones who ultimately are reaping the rewards from the business. That's a unique position to be in. And we asked ourselves, we want to make a profit. We want to earn income. But what other value can the business produce that's going to add something to our lives? And where we came down on that was things like, having time, being in control of our time is probably the more apt way to say it. Being in control of our time, having a choice in the direction of what we do in both business and life, and having a sense of autonomy and freedom in our lives. So we looked at Common Craft and said, well, this is another way of thinking like where the future of Common Craft is going is what are our shareholder values and what can we do to the business to make sure that it's promoting those things. And so for someone who's starting out, someone who's thinking about creating a business, I think in the beginning, it's really important to get cash flow, like to get money going. I think the big enough perspective works best after a bit of success, after there is a foundation, after your financial house is in order, because that's essential. Like you're a business person, there has to be a certain amount of success that's happened for you to be able to open your mind more to think, okay, I can pay the bills. I can pay my employees if I have them. I'm at this point now. Am I going to continue going, shareholder value as all money? Or am I going to think about this business as, what some people might say is a lifestyle business? I don't really like that term, but a business that is designed and built to support what is important to me as a person because I am the shareholder. And I think I hope that helps jogs people's thoughts about ways to think that what is the return on what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, and it really resonates as most of the book did for me, Lee, because it's really how I envision building my business in retirement with my wife, right? And when I look at values, I'm really hearing what you say, because one of the number one things that I look at is I need to have the freedom to do what I want, where I want, when I want, how I want, if I want, right? Like, there has to be that if is that last point. If I don't want, and you talk about this, if you want to take the day off and go for a walk with the dogs, you go for a walk with the dogs. It's your call because you have that freedom, right?
Yeah. So you mentioned something earlier that I think fits in with this too, is I do see that time is the new wealth. And what I mean by that is that in the future, I think that people will start to see that more money is not really going to solve the problem that they're experiencing or make them more happy. It's going to be time that does that. And that there's a way to think about wealth that involves designing your life to actually have more time, because time to me is the pathway to freedom. Like when you want freedom, you have to have the time to be able to actually enact or take action to do the things that you want to. And I think that means maybe designing time into your life by reserving days or times on your calendar, or having constraints in your personal life, or there's lots of things you can do. The hard thing about time is you can't pile it up like you can money. Like every day it just slides through your fingers, and it has to be something that's done deliberately to be like, I'm going to be in control of my time. And I think time is something that we can control, unlike, how much we're paid. That's one of the few things we can actually make the decision to be, I'm going to have more time. And that might mean telling a friend, I'm not going to go out Tuesday night, or saying, I'm not going to travel to see the family, or I'm not going to do, it means saying no is part of it. And I think that's hard for people. It's hard for me, but time does require some of those kinds of things, those boundaries. Yeah, for sure.
And Lee, I mean, if we'll totally digress on this one, because you're nailing it. And I love this idea, because at the end of the day, time's our only finite resource, right? We can make money, we can work longer, we can print, money is plentiful, it's abundant, but we only have a certain amount of time on this earth, and we only have a certain amount of hours in a day. So when you look at it, time really is, for us, it's our only finite resource. And you talked about happiness, and people think the more money I have, the happier I'll be. But you talked about it a little in your book. I think it was referencing the book, The Happiness Equation, it might have been. But a lot of people don't realize happiness it's not what we have. It's not what we buy. It's simply a choice that we choose to experience. But it's also through the actions that we take, right? How are we living in our daily life? What behaviors are we taking? And I'm not sure if the book was, I read recently, I think it was called the PERMA model that they came out with. And it talked about, hey, here are the 5 things you have to do on a regular basis in order to be happy. And you looked at the list and you were like, oh, that's actually pretty simple. And it doesn't really require any money. So to you, how are people missing that piece with happiness and time in their quest for I mean, let's call it more, right? Bigger company, more money, bigger house, more car, just more.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a few. Well, I did a bit of research for the book around the idea of happiness, and there's a few points that I would make. One is that there's more research now that says that about 50% of your happiness is actually a part of you that you can't change. It's sort of the idea, and you can look it up. It's called the set point of happiness, and we kind of have to realize where we are and think about like, well, people are born happy or unhappy on a spectrum, let's say. But that doesn't mean that that's your destiny. They say that 10% is circumstance and 40% is the actions that you take and how what's happening in or what you're doing to help support your happiness. And so then I can't remember the guy's name, but he did happiness research that said that there's like the pleasant life, the good life, the pleasant life, and the meaningful life. And the meaningful life was the highest one. And its basis was that if you think of that 40% that you can control, using your specific skills and strengths in service to others, that is the one thing that he found was what made people added the most happiness to their life, was using your skills and strengths in service to others. And so I thought that was a really good lesson about that.
What was that, Seligman? Does that ring a bell?
Yeah, I think it probably was. That rings a bell. Yeah, he did a lot of his research through surveys, I think.
Yeah, and I think he's the founder of, it's a specific type of psychology that a lot of people, positive psychology.
Yeah, I think it is positive psychology.
Yeah, and so, like I read that and I'm like, I want to do a master's in positive psychology. This is the coolest thing ever. And then I'm like, why do I need to do a master's? I'm just deferring starting. I'm planning. Just go out and start talking to people. You don't need that extra designation.
To your point about the more. I lost a light here. Sorry about that. Let me see if I can make this one a little better here. So yeah. All right, that's better. The other one might go in a minute. So yeah, I feel like it's such a cultural thing, and it's a very American thing, I think, to think about always keeping up with the Joneses. And I like to think that something that I came to see in our story was that I took pride in some of the things that other people might see as not trying hard enough or not being the right kind of entrepreneur or something like that. And saying, like, an example that I tell is that I used to go to a lot of tech conferences like South by Southwest and things like that, and talk to people who were doing startups and had all kinds of, we're hiring, we've got all our products in beta, blah, blah, blah. And then it would switch to me and be like, well, we're making videos, we're a creative team making explainer videos. And you could just kind of tell they thought like, well, that's not really entrepreneurship. That's, you're not a real entrepreneur. And I could never say it at the time, but I would always think to myself like, oh no, we're just playing a different game. Like, there are lots of games to be played in entrepreneurship. And the game that I'm playing is as valid as yours is, I think. But keep in mind that what you're doing is valid. And yes, there's a huge opportunity that you might be working towards. But you know what? I don't have an alarm clock. And I haven't had a meeting in 3 weeks. And I work from home and make passive income from home. And so you're telling me that that's not like entrepreneurship, or that's not the right way to do it? Because I think it's kind of a good way to do it. And I really think that form of focusing on lifestyle, focusing on time, happiness, whatever you value, making that a priority, I think is the sort of antidote to keeping up with the Joneses. And I think that there's this idea of extrinsic versus intrinsic motivations. And that's really kind of sums up what this is that the people who are thinking more are thinking extrinsically. They're thinking about themselves in the context of everybody else, versus intrinsically, which is more focusing on you and what makes you happy and what makes you feel successful. And so I think understanding maybe that difference is something that's important.
Well, I think as you say that, one of the greatest things to come out of COVID is that, right? And so what I mean by that is, and I recognize a lot of people had negative outcomes of COVID with their jobs and, finances, and a lot of people did well. But I think for a lot of us, there was a lot less keeping up with the Joneses. If you look at the American savings rates, never higher, right? You couldn't really go in a lot of places like here. You couldn't go out for dinner anymore. You couldn't go to the movies. You couldn't go to a party. So you were living at home And I think when you're living at home with your family or you're living at home, just couple of you, like it really starts to change what you value. Because all of a sudden you see, well, heck, all that stuff we were wasting money on. All that really matters is the people in this room. And so I don't know what you've seen or how it impacts you. And I'd love to tie it to your concept of a moratorium. But like COVID forced all of us into a moratorium. Like we couldn't go out and spend. So some people, it's interesting because they say, hey, COVID ended and we're seeing the inflation. Because a lot of people are like, oh, like COVID's over, roaring 20s. Let's go get our jam back on fast. And some of us are like, oh, COVID taught me that I really do just like going into my backyard, jumping in my studio and calling up an author and having a conversation about their book. That's way more enjoyable than going to the bar or going to do X. And so I'm wondering whether you've seen a change in how you view life and how you're seeing those around you view it. And if you can explain to people, now that I brought it up, what is a moratorium and how does that tie to this conversation?
Yeah, definitely. So I think that I look back on going into those early days of the quarantine because of COVID as kind of a relief where suddenly we didn't have to think about doing all the things we were doing. And I think a lot of other people felt that too, that it feels good not to have those obligations and those things. And my wife, Sachi, is pretty introverted anyway. So we've always been very home focused, but we became even more home focused, I think, to a degree that it's just become a new lifestyle where we have a low intensity lifestyle when it comes to especially social engagements and things like that. But yeah, I'm glad you brought up the moratorium thing, because I think that something that's really important to understand about small companies and people who are founding small companies is that the personal side of your life, your personal spending, whether you want to think it is or not, is connected to the business and the business's success. Because if you think, oh, I'm an entrepreneur, I can go out and buy a yacht, you've got to have a business that can pay for a yacht. And that's where the rub is for a lot of people, is that they see that working, but then don't see the opportunity for it to work the opposite way. And to say well, if I don't buy a yacht, then that's less yacht money my company has to make to be successful. And so if you think, well, what are my expenses this year? If I can be happy with less spending and learn and start to build a lifestyle that's more about resilience and self-sufficiency and trying to just be more financially responsible, then it doesn't take that much for your business to be successful and to support you. And that's another thing that's kind of hard for people. And again, it's a privilege to have that perspective. But the moratorium idea really came from my relationship with my wife, Sachi. We come from very different sort of perspectives when it comes to money. And she's very financially responsible, very much watches every penny. I realize that you're an accountant, you deal with people around money a lot, but she very, very diligent about it. And I was brought up a little more carefree. One of the examples was checking out at a drugstore or something and me seeing some knickknack on the table and throwing it into the pot of what things we were buying. And she kind of shrugged, but once we got to the car, she was like, "You're that person. You're who buys that crap by the register." I always wondered who those people were, and now I know that it's you. So within that context, we started to think about having a goal. And so a goal for us, in 2006, we had a big trip that lasted a year. And for the year before the trip, we changed our lifestyle. It's like we flipped a switch that said, okay, we're not going to eat out. We're not going to, have extraneous expenses. We're not going to do other travel. It just was basically a change in lifestyle that was oriented around saving money and really trying to achieve this goal. And we came to call it a term that a friend of mine introduced me to, called the moratorium. So it's like a moratorium on spending money. And at the time, it was a short-term way to save money. And, not eating out is not necessarily going to pay for a year-long trip, but it really conditioned me to think about my lifestyle and the money I was spending on things that I didn't need to, and to be more responsible and to also be more resilient when it comes to finances and realize I don't actually need that much to be happy. That's not where my happiness comes from. I love having a new phone or whatever it is, but I kind of came to see the good life really is more like the moratorium of like finding that happy medium between, spending, but also being aware of what really makes you happy and all the things that you can do to support that happiness without having to spend a lot to do it. And so that's kind of a summary of it, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, and you hit a lot of nails on the head throughout that, because a lot of people don't realize financial independence is something I write a fair bit about. And you can increase your income, and one of the benefits of that is there's a bit of a cap on how much you can reduce your spending, right? There's sort of that minimum amount you need to hit the bare necessities. And there's technically no limit on your earnings potential, although the more you want to earn, like you said earlier, the more you're working, the more hours, the more stress, the more, like heart palpitations and caffeine consumption. And, it's not really that healthy. And I've been there. But, to the extent that you get your earnings to a good level, if you can control your spending, then you're going to reach financial independence or the ability to retire or pivot or change what you're doing in life so much easier, right? And a lot of people seem to miss that.
Yeah, and it takes some conditioning, I think. It's not something that is easy to pull off just like one day you're doing it, one day you're not. That's what I learned from the moratorium, was that I got conditioned to see that so much of that spending was through habit and through assumptions about happiness, and realize that once you take a step back and really move into a different lifestyle and kind of thought process mindset, that's what really revealed to me what was really going to make me happy, or what I could really achieve, or like what I could withstand, I guess, as an example. Oh, this reminds me of the thing in the book that in the example of Lawrence of Arabia, there is a scene in the movie Lawrence of Arabia that I love for this. Is Lawrence is like the superhuman soldier, and he's in a tent with some other soldiers, and he lights a cigarette and holds the match up and puts the match out with his fingers without flinching. And one of the guys says, well, what's the trick? How do you do it? And he said, the trick is not minding that it hurts. And that's kind of this mindset of like, nothing in life comes without hard work and without dedication, and maybe doing things for a while that, that get you where you want to be. And instead of moaning about it all the time or feeling like a victim, just not minding it. Like, it's the mindset of not minding it. And it's not necessarily pain like a match, but the pain of having to spend a couple of years working on your business before it gets to where you want it to be, or even more long than that. That's the kind of pain that I talk about, because I really don't think that there are any silver bullets. There's no secrets. I think that it really does come down to dedication and hard work, optimism, keeping your mind on what you're working on, and pushing through. Like, this wraps in with the whole failure idea. Like, it's easy to get discouraged, but you have to kind of take your licks, because it doesn't come for free.
Well, it wraps in with everything, right, Lee? Because, I'll throw an example out at you, and you'll totally get where I'm going on this one. I took a course a week or two ago on audience building, and it was for Twitter and building an audience. And I've been growing well, but it's okay. Well, I'm here and I want to be here. And the people that are teaching the course are there. So how do I get from A to Z? And all I really need, the way I look at when I take a course, all I really need are like 3 to 4 things that I didn't already know. And I'm like, I got value from this course, right? Because those 3 or 4 things are going to change my game. But then we get to Q&A, and people are throwing questions at the person who's running this course. And they're sort of along the lines of, it feels like they're almost taking a Tim Ferriss approach. Is, wow, like, it sounds like you put a lot of time and effort into growing your audience. How can I do the same thing, but with, only 1 to 2 hours a week? And you're thinking, like, why did you pay $750 for this course?
Oh, that's too funny.
Like, these people that are in here that are teaching you, they're probably putting in 20, 30 hours a week. And you want to be them, but you want to be them on 1 to 2 hours a week.
Yeah, for sure. That's what everybody wants.
You don't want it to hurt.
Yeah, totally.
So, yeah, I thought you'd love that one.
Yeah, that's great. I love that.
Yeah, and so much of, that's a platform that's great for doing what you say, because when you first start on that platform, most people, your writing's not good. your networking's bad, and you just show up every day and you get better and better and better and better. And you have to be, to your point, I mean, you have to be comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to be willing to ship. You have to ask yourself after you ship, well, what wasn't that great about that post? How could it be better? Right? You go through the list and everything you're saying, like, it's not only magical for building a business. Like, what you've written here is a recipe for building an audience. It's a recipe for growing on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, whatever you choose. You have to be willing to do all these steps that you've shared with the audience today. And so it brings me, I'll throw a last question at you, is I'm talking about Twitter. So use whatever it is. I know you had, I'll share what your poison was. For me, it's, I'm checking my podcast statistics every day. How many listens were there? I'm checking my metrics on, how many followers did I add on Twitter today? And like you with checking the receipts in the email to see how much money was coming in on a daily basis, my happiness can often be tied to performance, right? Like, it's performance metrics. And if you're a metrics person, and it sounded like you were, and I am, and those metrics then drive our happiness. And that's one of the downsides of solopreneurship or entrepreneurship, and especially for creatives, right? And so how did Sachi solve that with you, with her concept of, hey, look, Lee, you're in charge of the macro. I'm in charge of the micro. Like, you're not allowed to look at the metrics anymore.
Yeah. That's literally what happened.
Yeah. So do you want to take us through what your challenge was and how has the solution worked for the two of you?
It comes and goes. So yeah, ever since we sold our first video, we would get emails every time someone would buy a video or become a member. And those emails really were very closely connected to my daily happiness. And I think that all that we've done to try to make Common Craft work the way we want is really kind of based on this idea of us having a happy home life, of us having a life that's filled with happiness and with satisfaction and things like that. And she saw that the thing that was holding me back from that the most was me being bummed about not getting enough of those emails. And so she convinced me to unsubscribe from them, not get them anymore. That didn't mean I couldn't go to the website and check them. She couldn't control that. But I did. I said, you're right. This is something I shouldn't be so engaged in. So I turned them off. And I think that was a really positive step for me. But there's always two sides, right? I was bummed some days, but I was probably extra happy on other days. So it's kind of pick your poison because I do enjoy the exhilaration and the endorphins from getting those things too. But I remain engaged in all the data. I'll be honest, I'm looking at my browser right now and my tab has a 3 on it. And the thought has crossed my mind, I wonder if any of those are people signing up for Build Livable, my newest project, signing up for the free course kind of thing. And I've been putting it out of my mind, but that is the thing now is that I'm watching those emails come in every day. But I think I've conditioned myself to actually think about the bigger picture, and to try to be more macro and to think the internet works in mysterious ways. Some days are good, some days are bad. I have no idea why. I just have to keep focused on the long term and realize that this is a multi-year project. I can't think about days or weeks.
That's a beautiful way to say it, right? And what I try to write for a lot of people is the longer our horizon, the better decisions we're going to make, the better investments we make, the more likely we are to not be negatively impacted. I'm adding this one based on what you're sharing, by mindset, by dopamine hits or non-hits. And so building Livable, is that the next project? And does that tie to the house build? Take us through that, 'cause that's new.
It is. So, we've done a few other house projects in the past, and I've always loved the process, loved learning about it, really working directly with the architects and builders to really understand how it works. And what we kind of realize is that, when someone builds a home, it's often the biggest investment of their lives. And they're just kind of thrown into the fire. There's no training, there's no instruction manual. You just have to learn on the job. And this kind of comes back to that first question about what's motivating me is we saw that as a really unmet need is these people, we know how it feels to be overwhelmed and to have all these worries about money and timelines, schedules, supplies, all this stuff. And we thought, we are actually in a really unique position. We've been professional educators since 2007. We know how to make videos and media, explain things, and we also happen to have a decade of house building experience. So we are in a perfect position to use our skills to help people who are going to be in the position we were just in, and to talk to them homeowner to homeowner about here's what to expect. Here's what an architect does. Here's what a builder does. Here's the phases of the project. Here's all the questions you're going to be asked. Here's all these things. And I think that it's been going for about 6 months. We have 1,500 people on our email list now. It's sort of getting there, but I feel like that nothing like this has ever existed. No one even expects it to be there. So we have a huge challenge of convincing an entire industry that is huge that we're doing something unique and we're uniquely qualified to do it. And that's just going to take time. It's going to take months and months of getting our message out there. And you mentioned that audience course. Maybe I should take that too, because we're starting from scratch. We are starting from nothing, new brand, new direction, new expertise. And that's part of the challenge that I love so much is I've been through it enough to feel like I've got a good starting point. But again, learning all the time.
Yeah, I love that because so we went through 2016, we bought our lot and we finished the house 2019 December. So 2 months before COVID, right? So.
Oh, wow. Yeah, ours was during COVID. Yeah.
Yeah, during COVID. And we just beat it. But I mean, we, probably a year over time and 50% over budget. So I get it would have been good to have taken the course in advance and not made a lot of the mistakes we made. So yeah, I definitely should write a thread on that.
Everybody makes mistakes.
Yeah. So what haven't we covered that you might want to get across to people?
One of the things that I like to bring up is I work directly with my wife, and people often ask, like, how does that work? Like, how do I could never work with my wife. And I think they might be surprised about that, but she prefers staying behind the scenes. But it's been an ongoing practice to figure out what works best for us and understanding our individual perspectives on things and how to get through decision making. I think that for so many people, relationships die or succeed when it comes down to making decisions. And that's often involves money. It involves like the future. And I think that one of the things that helped us get through that is to try to be honest with each other in a way that we tell each other that we're trying to improve each other in a way that says like, okay, let's say that the two of us have a call with someone. We debrief. And it's kind of like, well, what sucked most about that? It's like, well, you sounded a little bit blah, blah, blah on this. And this other thing you said, you probably could have stated differently. And I cannot say enough about how that level of communication in a business between people, even if they're not couples, of being able to accept criticism and to give criticism without emotion, to focus on this is me trying to be helpful and to improve, and I expect the same from you. I think that's been a big part of what's enabled us to do this business since 2007 is there's always emotional things. There's always a lot going on, but over the years, we've developed this communication style where we've tried to try to take the emotion out of it and just keep things like, this is just what we need to do to get better.
Yeah, I think at Bridgewater, they call that radical candor, right? And it's such a powerful way to operate is, you're not doing it to insult. You're not doing it to point out fault. You're doing it to make each other better and say, hey, it's really just great constructive feedback at all times, both directions. So that's wonderful. I love it. How can people find you?
Yep. That even goes for like meals. I was going to say that often goes for meals. I do that because we love to cook and it's always like, oh, that was good. Too much salt. Maybe next time don't use as much salt, but otherwise really good.
Yeah.
So my business is Common Craft. It's at commoncraft.com. And you can find all the other things I'm doing at leelefever.com. And my newest project is called Build Livable, and it's buildlivable.com. And I'm Lee LeFever on social networking. Nobody else seems to have my name on social media. So at Lee LeFever, my name.
Perfect. So we'll get all that in the show notes. And Lee, thank you very much for joining me today on The Pursuit of Learning. I appreciate it.
Oh, it was a great time. Thanks for having me, Clint.
Cheers. Thank you for joining us on The Pursuit of Learning. Make sure to hit the subscribe button and head over to our website, thepursuitoflearning.com, where you will find our show notes, transcripts, and more. If you like what you see, sign up for our mailing list. Until next time, your host in learning, Clint Murphy.